Just horrific in Myanmar. America's top diplomat hits out at the suffering of the Rohingya, but stops short of calling it ethnic cleansing or demanding sanctions. As Myanmar government leaders clear themselves of any crimes, what now for the persecuted Rohingya minority? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. Depending on who you ask, the Rohingya people in Myanmar are facing ethnic cleansing, genocide, or simply a complicated situation. Myanmar's government has exonerated itself and says accusations against the military are completely false. Many worldwide disagree. Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau calls the plight of the Rohingya a tremendous concern. The U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has also visited Myanmar. Here's what he said.
The humanitarian scale of this crisis is staggering. Over 600,000 Rohingya, mostly women and children, have fled to Bangladesh, and an unknown number from multiple ethnic groups remain internally displaced. And it is difficult when you're sitting halfway around the world and you see the images from the refugee camps in Bangladesh to not want to just rush to do something. And so I think all of these efforts, whether sanction bills or others, they're all well-intended. They're all well-intended. These are people who care about what's happening over here. They care about the human tragedy that they're seeing happen. They care about Myanmar, and they're looking for some way to help.
The Rohingya in Myanmar have been persecuted for years. Many thought that would change when Nobel Peace Prize winner Aung San Suu Kyi's party was elected, but it hasn't. The de facto leader responded to criticism about her alleged inaction after meeting America's top diplomat.
I haven't been silent. Actually, we've been sending out a lot of statements from my office, and I've also made statements of my own. But I think what people mean is that what I say is not interesting enough. But what I say is not meant to be exciting. It's meant to be accurate, and it's aimed at creating more harmony and a better future for everybody, not for setting people against each other.
Let's bring in our panel. Joining us now from Dhaka, Matthew Smith. He's the CEO of Fortify Rights. From Bangkok, Phil Robertson, the Deputy Director of the Asia Division for Human Rights Watch. And from Washington, D.C., Simon Billenness, who is the Executive Director of the International Campaign for the Rohingya. Now, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Now, Matthew, I want to start with you. We know that the U.S. government has been weighing whether to declare the crackdown against Rohingya Muslims to be an ethnic cleansing. But we did not hear Rex Tillerson use that phrase at all. He did not say ethnic cleansing when he was in Myanmar. What do you make of that, and why didn't he use those words?
Well, it's a good question. It's not unusual, unfortunately, in situations like this for governments to fail to diagnose the problem properly. From our perspective, it's no question that it's ethnic cleansing. And right now, it's very reasonable and urgent to be talking about the crime of genocide and crimes against humanity. So the fact that Secretary Tillerson failed to make that sort of determination is unfortunate. We can't speak to why specifically he did that, but I think urgently, not only the U.S., but the international community needs to get serious about action. Action right now is far more important than any particular words that might be used to describe the situation.
Now, Phil, I want to ask you, Secretary Tillerson also advised against any broad-based sanctions to be taken against the Myanmar government or military, but he did seem to leave the door open to the possibility of targeted sanctions, perhaps if it could be proven that certain individuals in Myanmar's military or government had abused the Rohingya Muslims and had been complicit in those atrocities. What do you make of that?
Well, I would hope that he would recognize a broad-based sanction like an arms embargo on the Burmese military is entirely appropriate and would be pushing for that at the UN Security Council. In terms of targeted sanctions, we understand that parts of the State Department are actually working on targeted sanctions and trying to identify various different military commanders who are in the field in Rakhine State, as well as the chain of command. They're trying to get more information from us and others about who these people are, and to then figure out whether they can perhaps either list them as a specially designated national under the Sanctions Act in the U.S., or possibly looking at global Magnitsky sanctions. I think both of these are entirely appropriate. But the key thing right now, I think, is to show the world community is unified against the atrocities that the Burma army has committed. And that starts with a global arms embargo. That starts with, resending this military back into the pariah status that it had during the military governments. And, once again, making sure that the top commanders of the army understand that nobody is accepting their version of events, including this report that they issued yesterday, saying that no human rights abuses were committed at all.
Simon, I'd like you to pick up on what Phil was saying. In the past 2 days, Myanmar's military essentially exonerated themselves. They issued the results of an internal investigation in which they said that they did not participate in any atrocities, that they were not complicit at all in any of the accusations that have been leveled against them. How does your group respond to that?
Well, this is simply not credible given the mountains of evidence that have been compiled by Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, Fortify Rights. And so what we're looking for here right now is for the US government and the international community to put enough pressure on the Burmese government and on the Burmese army to allow for a credible, independent investigation of what occurred in Rakhine State, and find out exactly, who the perpetrators were in the Burmese army and in Burmese military leadership.
Matthew, the Rohingya people have been called the most persecuted people on the planet. Now, on the one hand, they aren't allowed citizenship in Myanmar. That's the cause of a lot of their problems, aside from all the atrocities that have been committed. But also, those that have fled to Bangladesh, they don't qualify for citizenship. And beyond that, they aren't even classified officially as refugees in Bangladesh. Could you speak to that end of the problem and how much more of a problem that is for these very persecuted peoples?
It's a great question. It's an important question. Statelessness is at the heart of many of the problems that the Rohingya community faces, not only in Myanmar for decades, but also in other countries where the Rohingya have fled to. In Bangladesh right now, there's an enormous influx of people. I mean, still to this day, thousands of Rohingya are coming across the border weekly. We were just with hundreds of new arrivals coming across daily into Bangladesh. But their status as a stateless population makes it very difficult for the Rohingya to realize their rights. It's important to mention, however, though, that this is a group that their citizenship was revoked. So there was a time when the Rohingya did have citizenship status in Myanmar. The law was passed in 1982 that effectively revoked it. So until the Myanmar authorities change that law and restore Rohingya citizenship, unfortunately there will be problems at all levels of Myanmar society and internationally.
Matthew, let me ask you to follow up on how does the fact that the Rohingya refugees that are in Bangladesh, the fact that they are not classified as refugees, how does that also complicate the delivery of aid?
Well, right now, the delivery of aid is complicated on so many different levels. The needs are immense. Shelter, health care, adequate food. There are tens of thousands of unaccompanied minors. There are also tens of thousands of expectant mothers in the camps as well. And so the authorities do need to recognize this population as a refugee population. Refugees have rights. The Rohingya in Bangladesh have rights. Right now, however, I will say the Bangladesh authorities have, that we've seen on the ground, border guards, are protecting the Rohingya, and it's been very good to see. We've seen it on the banks of the Naf River. We've seen it surrounding the refugee camps. The needs are tremendous. The challenges are huge. There are enormous protection concerns, particularly for the unaccompanied minors. But right now, we have seen so far a decent response from the authorities in terms of efforts to protect the population.
Phil, much has been reported about the kindness that the Bangladeshi people are showing toward the Rohingya refugees. When I was in Bangladesh last month, there was a plan that was being talked about, being floated by Bangladeshi officials, whereby Rohingya refugees would be transferred possibly to an offshore island where an encampment would be built specifically for them. But I must say that everybody I spoke with in Bangladesh, privately would say they didn't think this was realistic. What is your reaction to this plan? Do you think this is something that could become a possibility?
About the plan, we think it would be a humanitarian disaster. The island in question is one which is partly submerged during part of the year. It's uninhabitable. It would require a tremendous amount of construction. It's very vulnerable to typhoons. The list goes on and on. Recently, in the last day or two, the Ministry of Finance of Bangladesh has said that they're suspending the project, in part because they want to continue to talk with the Myanmar authorities about having these people go back, having the Rohingya return to where they came from in northern Rakhine State. We'll see how this plays out. I think that the actual idea is very wrong-headed. I think that by isolating these people in this remote area on an island, which no one wants to live on in the first place, you're putting these people in harm's way. And the idea of moving hundreds of thousands of people, 9 to 10 hours by bus across Bangladesh to this area, I mean, it's an immense undertaking that I don't think would be physically feasible for the government of Bangladesh to carry off. But they've been talking about it quite seriously. They've been talking to donors in the past about it. So we'll have to keep a close eye on this and make sure it doesn't come about.
Now, gentlemen, I just want you to stay with me for a moment. We're going to take a pause so that we can bring to our viewers another angle of this story. Now, I saw evidence of this firsthand when I was in Bangladesh last month at Rohingya refugee camps in Cox's Bazar. Now, some of the people we spoke with told me about horrific atrocities that they'd escaped from.
My baby was in my lap when the soldiers hit me and he fell out of my arms. Then they pulled me closer to the wall and I could hear that he was crying. Then after a few minutes, I could hear that they were hitting him too.
She tells us soldiers from Myanmar's army had set a fire outside the house they were in. And then, the unthinkable.
My baby was thrown into the fire and then they raped me.
Despite the relief his family tries to provide, 18-year-old Rohingya refugee Mohammed Hassan is still haunted. For a while, his mother and siblings try to give him a brief respite from the extreme heat and humidity. But no matter how much medicine is given or the number of bandages applied, his scars, both physical and psychological, will remain.
They took us out from our home and tied our hands behind our backs. They pulled us along the roads and kicked us. They pulled us through the village, through the jungle, and took us to join another group of people. Then they made us lie down on top of one another.
With nothing else at her disposal, a desperate mother blows air on her baby's severely burned head to try and cool her off.
There are doctors in the camp, but when I took her to the doctor, they said they don't have the right medicine for her. She needs to be taken to see specialized doctors. Where will I get the money?
Arafa Begum tells us her baby Toslima was burned when Myanmar's military set her village in Rakhine State ablaze. It took her family 10 days to escape to Bangladesh. With no medical care, the 9-month-old girl's wounds, especially the one on top of her head, have only worsened. The plight of the Rohingya is highlighted in the latest report by Fortify Rights and the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. The report says the most recent violence in Myanmar started in October 2016 when a Rohingya armed group attacked several police in outposts in Rakhine State. The Myanmar government say the army retaliated for the killing of dozens of people. Fortify Rights says the army used the operation as an excuse to attack innocent Rohingya civilians. Myanmar soldiers are accused of burning entire villages, killing men, women, and children indiscriminately. They're also accused of raping dozens of women. The report says the situation amounts to ethnic cleansing. That's defined as rendering an area ethnically homogeneous by using force or intimidation. Fortify Rights says the Rohingya crisis may even be genocide, which is the intentional targeting of a community for destruction by murdering people and imposing measures to prevent births within the group. Myanmar's military leaders deny security forces are guilty of all that. Now, Simon, I want to ask you, what do you make of Matthew's reports, and do you consider what's going on in Rakhine State to be genocide?
Well, I think it's very clear that the Burmese army is on the march to genocide, and we have to stop this. What makes these reports so credible is that the Burmese army has used the exact same tactics against other ethnic minorities, the Kachin, the Shan, the Karen. In fact, a mother in Karen State successfully sued Unocal for the fact that the Burmese army, when clearing her village to make way for a pipeline built by Unocal and Total, threw her baby into the fire, and her baby died of those injuries. So this is entirely credible given what the Burmese army has done before, not just in Rakhine State, but against other ethnic minorities in Burma.
Matthew, I want to ask you more about the reporting that went into this. Obviously, this was a year-long investigation, as you and your group have stated before. Could you try to illuminate for our viewers, first of all, what is the difference between ethnic cleansing, which is a term that we're hearing from many international groups about what's going on in Rakhine State and against the Rohingya, and the difference between that and genocide?
Yeah, sure. So ethnic cleansing is, as mentioned, it's forcing or pressuring or coercing a group of people out of a certain area. This is obviously something that is condemned. Ethnic cleansing is a horrific phenomenon wherever and whenever it occurs. Ethnic cleansing, however, is not a crime under international law. Genocide, of course, is. Genocide is a crime that's defined under international law. Genocide is essentially committing certain prohibited acts, such as murder, against a specific group with the intent to destroy that group in whole or in part. And right now, from our perspective, in Rakhine State, what the Myanmar authorities have been doing is undeniably ethnic cleansing. It's clear at this point that populations of people have been forced from their areas. The question now is the way in which that took place and other crimes that have been perpetrated, and the legal determination for that is important. Words do matter. With respect to the crime of genocide, we're concerned when we see situations like what unfolded in Tulatoli. Tulatoli is a village in Mongdaw Township. Myanmar authorities corralled a group of Rohingya, an extremely large group of Rohingya, told them they would be safe, and then massacred them. We're also seeing the Myanmar army lay landmines so that Rohingya who are fleeing the country will be maimed or killed. I just the other day was speaking with a family of people who attempted to flee Myanmar, getting on a boat to cross over into Bangladesh, and the authorities opened fire on them. So what we're seeing does certainly resemble or would constitute the intent to destroy. And I think, as we've mentioned before, genocidal intent is alive and well in Myanmar. There needs to be an investigation to identify the specific perpetrators of these crimes and ascertain the intent with which they committed them.
Phil, who makes the ultimate determination as to if this will be deemed a genocide? And do you believe that this will ultimately, whether in a few months or a few years, be deemed a genocide?
Well, the ultimate determinator of this would be, in our view, an international criminal court, such as the International Criminal Court. And, that is where we have called for the perpetrators of these acts against the Rohingya to be sent. We have clearly said that crimes against humanity have been committed by the Myanmar military. The various different prohibited acts that are in the Genocide Convention have also been incorporated into the Rome Statute. So, we're talking about many of the same things. The big issue with the difference between crimes against humanity and genocide is talking about the intent to destroy in whole and in part. And our view is that, we're not even to the point where we're able to now get the Myanmar military into the International Criminal Court, because action to do that is being blocked at the UN Security Council, primarily by China, but also by Russia. Myanmar has not ratified the Rome Statute. They're not a member of the court. And so the only way to get persons in Myanmar referred to the International Criminal Court would be through the UN Security Council. And so that's why we've spent so much time trying to unbreak that deadlock and try to get more information about Tulatoli, about sexual and gender-based violence. We're going to have a major report released tomorrow, looking at the systematic use of rape against Rohingya women and girls to, push them out of the area, to basically terrify them and traumatize them in a way that they would not want to come back to the area again, sort of fulfilling the ethnic cleansing aspects of this, but also contributing to the crimes against humanity that we've talked about. So, we think that these words do matter. I think that Matt is absolutely right in saying there has to be a really comprehensive investigation. And the problem is the fact-finding mission that was appointed by the Human Rights Council of the UN to do that is being blocked by Aung San Suu Kyi and by the Burmese military.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Aung San Suu Kyi, because that takes me to my last question. Simon, I would be remiss if I did not ask about this particular issue. Obviously, there has been mounting criticism of Aung San Suu Kyi, many saying that she should be doing a lot more. Now, there is also, though, a school of thought in some diplomatic circles that perhaps putting more pressure on her is not the best thing to do, would not really be helpful in trying to solve this crisis. What do you say to that?
Well, I think pressure definitely needs to be applied to the Burmese army, to military-owned businesses, particularly those in the trade of precious gems like jade and rubies. But I think it needs to be understood that although Aung San Suu Kyi has no authority or control over the Burmese army and other security forces, she is foreign minister. So when Burmese representatives speak at the UN, when they call on China to block any action against Burma and the Burmese army, that's her representatives who are making that call. So that is on her.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks to our guests, Matthew Smith, Phil Robertson, and Simon Billenness, and thank you for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the whole team here, bye for now.